I am Alina Moore, and I am 34 years old. Until last Christmas, I believed fairness was something you didn't have to beg for in a marriage. I believed respect came naturally when love was real. I believed that if two people built a life together, paid bills together, suffered together, dreamed together, then loyalty would follow. I was wrong. What broke me wasn't shouting or cheating or violence. It was a quiet decision made behind my back, wrapped in shiny Christmas paper, that revealed exactly where I stood in my husband's world. Before I continue, please like, comment, and subscribe, and tell us where you're watching from. Stories like this are shared by women who loved deeply, trusted completely, and learned the hardest lessons in silence. If this story touches you, know you're not alone. Daniel and I had been married for 6 years. On the outside, we looked solid. Two professionals, a clean home, shared routines, polite smiles at family gatherings. People often said we were lucky. What they didn't see were the small imbalances that crept in slowly. Decisions Daniel made without me, conversations he avoided, priorities he never explained. I ignored them because love teaches you to be patient, and marriage teaches you to compromise. Or so I thought. Christmas that year was supposed to be simple. We agreed on a modest budget. No extravagant gifts. Just appreciation. Daniel had recently received a generous bonus at work, and we decided together that most of it would go towards savings. I remember him saying, "Let's be responsible this year." I believed him. 2 days before Christmas, we sat at the dining table wrapping gifts. The house smelled like cinnamon and pine. Soft music played in the background. I was folding tissue paper when Daniel casually mentioned he had already handled the family gifts. I smiled and said, "Oh, good. What did you get everyone?" He hesitated. Just for a second. But I noticed. "For my mom," he said carefully. "I transferred some money." "How much?" I asked, not suspicious, just curious. $5,000. I laughed at first. I thought it was a joke. When I realized it wasn't, my chest tightened. 5,000. I repeated slowly. "Yes," he said, shrugging. "It's Christmas. She deserves it." I nodded, trying to process it. Then I asked the question that would change everything. "And my mom?" Daniel didn't look at me. He focused on the tape dispenser. "I sent her $50. I thought I misheard him. "Sorry, how much?" "50, he said again. Calm. Certain. Final. The room went quiet. Even the music felt too loud. "Daniel," I said, my voice shaking, "did you just say you gave your mother $5,000 and my mother 50? "Yes." I stared at him like I was seeing a stranger. "My mother raised me alone," I said slowly. "She helped us when we moved into this house. She watches our children when you travel. She never asks for anything. And my mother is my mother," he snapped. "This isn't a competition." But it was. And he knew it. I felt humiliation rise in my throat. "So my mother is worth $50 to you?" "That's not what I said." "That's exactly what you showed." Daniel stood up, clearly annoyed. "You're overreacting. My money, my decision." That sentence landed like a slap. My money. Not our money. Not our decision. That night, I didn't sleep. I lay awake replaying every sacrifice I had made. Every time I defended him. Every time I told my mother, "Daniel is good. He means well." I felt embarrassed, not just for myself, but for her. The next morning, my phone rang. It was my mother, Evelyn. "Alina," she said gently. "Thank you for the Christmas gift." My stomach dropped. "Mom, are you okay?" I asked. "Yes," she said. "I just wanted to say thank you. Every little bit helps. Every little bit." I swallowed hard. "I'm sorry," I whispered. "I didn't know." She laughed softly. "It's fine, my love. Truly. Please don't stress." After the call ended, I went into the bathroom and cried silently so Daniel wouldn't hear me. My mother didn't complain. She didn't question it. She accepted the humiliation with grace, and that hurt even more. That evening, I confronted Daniel again. "You embarrassed my mother," I said. "And you embarrassed me." "I didn't embarrass anyone," he replied. "You're just sensitive." That was the moment I realized something terrifying. This wasn't ignorance. This was intention. And worse, this wasn't the first time. I started remembering other moments. How he always upgraded his mother's phone but questioned buying groceries for my mom. How his family vacations were necessary while mine were optional. How he spoke about loyalty, but only when it benefited him. A few days later, his sister Vanessa came over. She smiled politely, but her words were sharp. "I heard you were upset about the Christmas gifts," she said. "Yes," I replied calmly. I was. She scoffed. Well, Daniel takes care of his own. That's how we were raised. I looked at her and said something that shocked even me. I am his own. The room went quiet. That night I made a decision, not out of anger but clarity. I stopped begging. I stopped explaining. I started watching, listening, preparing. Because when someone shows you how little they value your roots, they are also showing you how easily they can cut you loose. And I wasn't going to let that happen quietly. After that conversation with Vanessa, something shifted inside me. It wasn't anger anymore. It was awareness. A heavy, uncomfortable awareness that once it settles in, never really leaves. I started noticing things I had ignored for years. Not because they were invisible, but because love had trained me to excuse them. Daniel became colder. Not openly cruel. Just distant. Short answers. Avoided eye contact. He behaved like someone who felt challenged, not remorseful. Like a man whose authority had been questioned, not whose wife had been hurt. One evening, I overheard him on the phone with his mother. I handled it, he said quietly. She'll get over it. I froze in the hallway. There was a pause. Then he continued, his tone defensive. No, I'm not apologizing. She needs to understand where she stands. Where she stands. Those words echoed in my chest long after he hung up. I walked back into the bedroom and sat on the edge of the bed, my hands trembling. That wasn't frustration talking. That was belief. That was how he truly saw me. From that day on, I stopped confronting him. Not because I had forgiven him, but because I needed to see the full picture. People reveal more when they think you're no longer watching. I began quietly reviewing our finances. Not snooping, just looking. What I found made my stomach turn. The joint savings account Daniel often talked about? Most of the money had been transferred out over the past year. Large amounts. Regularly. Always marked as family support. Family support that never included my family. I checked again and again, hoping I was wrong. Hoping there was an explanation. There wasn't. When I asked him casually one night, "Did we move money recently?" He didn't even look up from his phone. "I told you already," he said. "My mom needed help." "How much help?" I asked carefully. He sighed loudly. "Why are you interrogating me?" "Because marriages collapse in silence," I wanted to say. But instead, I nodded and walked away. That night, I called my best friend Renee. I hadn't told her everything yet. I didn't want to sound dramatic. But the words spilled out anyway. "Renee," I said quietly, "what do you do when you realize your husband doesn't respect your family, or you?" She didn't answer immediately. Then she said something that stuck with me. "You stop asking why. And you start asking how long you're willing to live like this." The next weekend, we visited Daniel's mother, Margaret. The house was beautifully decorated. New furniture. Fresh paint. Subtle upgrades everywhere. $5,000 had gone a long way. Margaret hugged Daniel tightly, then turned to me with a thin smile. "Merry Christmas," she said. "Merry Christmas," I replied. She led us into the living room and began talking excitedly about renovations, trips she wanted to take, plans she was making. At no point did she acknowledge the imbalance. At no point did she say thank you to both of us. Then she said something that confirmed everything. "Daniel has always been my backbone," she said proudly. "Some women forget that a man's first responsibility is his mother." She looked directly at me when she said it. Daniel smiled. I felt my heart harden in a way it never had before. Not with rage, but with clarity. Later, while Daniel stepped outside to take a call, Margaret leaned closer to me. "You're lucky," she said softly. "Many women don't get husbands this generous." I smiled politely. Generosity should be fair. Her expression changed instantly. "Fair," she repeated. "Life isn't fair. Family is priority." I nodded slowly. Yes, family is priority. And for the first time, I understood something painful but freeing. I was never part of their definition of family. The drive home was silent. Daniel hummed along to the radio like nothing had happened. I stared out the window, watching houses blur past, wondering how I had missed this for so long. When we got home, I finally spoke. "Daniel," I said calmly, "do you think my mother deserves respect?" He hesitated. "Of course. Do you show it?" He frowned. "Why are you still on this?" "Because it defines everything," I thought. Instead, I said, "I just wanted to know." That night, I made another quiet decision. I stopped contributing emotionally the way I used to. I still cooked. Still cleaned. Still showed up. But I stopped pouring myself out. I stopped explaining my feelings. I stopped protecting his image when my family asked questions. And slowly, people started noticing. My mother called me one afternoon. "Alina," she said gently, "are you okay?" I almost lied. Almost. But then I remembered how easily she accepted that $50 without complaint. "No," I said honestly. "I'm not." She didn't push. She didn't judge. She just listened. "You deserve respect," she said after I finished. "From anyone who calls you family." That night, Daniel came home late. He smelled like cologne and stress. He tossed his keys on the counter and sighed. "You've been distant," he said. I looked at him calmly. "I've been observant." He didn't like that. "What does that mean?" "It means I'm paying attention." He laughed dismissively. "You're acting dramatic again." And there it was. The pattern. Hurt minimized. Truth dismissed. Responsibility avoided. I went to bed without responding. Over the next few weeks, the gap between us widened. Not because I pushed him away, but because I stopped chasing him. And people who are used to power notice immediately when it's no longer handed to them freely. One evening, Daniel finally snapped. "What do you want from me?" he demanded. I met his eyes. Calm. Steady. Unafraid. "I want fairness," I said. "I want partnership. I want respect, for me and for where I come from." He scoffed. "You're asking for too much." That sentence sealed something inside me. If respect was too much, then I had already stayed too long. And while he slept peacefully that night, believing I would eventually get over it, I lay awake planning something else entirely. Not revenge. Not drama. Preparation. Because when a woman stops arguing, it's not because she's weak. It's because she's getting ready. Preparation changes you. Quietly. Slowly. It strips emotion from decisions and replaces it with precision. While Daniel believed silence meant submission, I was doing the most dangerous thing a disregarded woman can do. I was reclaiming control. The first thing I did was protect my mother. I increased my monthly support to her without telling anyone. I made sure her bills were covered, her medications paid for, her dignity restored. I didn't announce it. I didn't seek praise. I simply corrected what had been allowed to happen. Every transfer felt like a small piece of my power returning. Then I separated my finances. Daniel didn't notice at first. He was used to me handling the invisible work, budgeting, balancing, smoothing things over. When joint expenses started coming up short, he assumed it was an error. When a payment bounced, he blamed the bank. It never occurred to him that I had stopped compensating for his choices. One evening, he stormed into the kitchen holding his phone. "Why is the joint account low?" he demanded. I didn't look up from the sink. "Because I stopped filling the gaps," I said calmly. "What gaps?" he snapped. "The ones you created," I replied. He stared at me, stunned. "You can't just do that." "I can," I said. And I did. That was the first time he looked nervous. A week later, his mother called. Not to ask how I was. Not to apologize. But to complain. "Daniel says you're being difficult," Margaret said sharply. "You're disrupting peace in the family." I took a deep breath. "No," I said. "I'm correcting imbalance." She scoffed. "You should be grateful. Not every woman gets a husband who provides." I answered slowly, carefully. "Providing without respect is control, not generosity." She hung up on me. Daniel was furious when he found out. "You embarrassed my mother," he shouted. I met his anger with stillness. "No," I said. "I stopped embarrassing myself." That was the moment the marriage truly fractured. The arguments that followed weren't explosive. They were cold. Strategic. He accused me of being ungrateful. I accused him of being unfair. He claimed tradition. I demanded partnership. And somewhere between those words, the truth became undeniable. We were no longer standing on the same ground. The final straw came quietly. Daniel sat me down one evening and said, "I need you to understand something. My mother will always come first." He expected tears. Begging. Negotiation. Instead, I nodded. "Thank you for finally being honest," I said. "What does that mean?" he asked. "It means I know exactly where I stand," I replied. "And now I get to choose." The silence that followed was heavy. Within weeks, I made arrangements he didn't know about. Legal consultations. Financial restructuring. Emotional boundaries. I didn't threaten. I didn't announce. I simply acted. When Daniel realized I was serious, it was too late. One night, he asked quietly, "Are you leaving?" I looked at him, the man I once defended, protected, and prioritized over myself. "I already did," I said. "Just not physically yet." He tried to bargain then. Promises surfaced. Apologies appeared. Even his mother softened her tone when she realized access was slipping. But clarity has a sound. And once you hear it, you can't unhear it. I didn't leave with bitterness. I left with dignity. Months later, my mother visited me in my new place. Smaller. Peaceful. Mine. She looked around and smiled. You seem lighter, she said. I am, I replied. She held my hands and said something I will never forget. Never let anyone make you feel ashamed of where you come from. It's where your strength was built. That Christmas, I gave my mother a gift, not measured in money, but in presence, respect, and restored pride. And for the first time in years, I felt whole. Some people think favoritism is harmless. That it's just culture. Just habit. Just love expressed differently. But favoritism in marriage is a quiet poison. It tells you who matters, who doesn't, and how disposable you are expected to be. I learned my lesson the hard way. And I chose myself anyway. If this story resonated with you, please like, comment, and subscribe, and tell us where you're watching from. Your voice matters here, and your support helps stories like this reach others who may be silently questioning their worth.